I was very disappointed in Pan's Labyrinth, let me tell you. I spent the whole movie waiting for David Bowie to rock up, and he never did. Like, what was up with that? I was promised David Bowie. At least I was until I realised I was thinking of the wrong Labyrinth movie. All joking apart though, Pan's Labyrinth is absolutely fantastic. It is such a unique film in the way it portrays its story and anti-fascist themes, and I feel like there's a lot that you can say about very little here. All things considered though, I was actually kind of surprised by how relatively simple this film's ideas truly were when you think about it. As I was writing notes for this film, I didn't really feel stretched to create meaning out of everything, and could instead interpret things on a relatively simple level. I mean, what do its themes really boil down to? Fascism is bad. That's kinda it. But I nonetheless think that this film actually works in spite of its simplicity for two main reasons. One, well, it's a valid theme to have, and I don't think you need to go that much deeper with it. And two, the theme is portrayed in a really interesting way due to the fact that it is blended with a childlike fairy tale, which means that we're sort of seeing this film from a child's perspective, where things are obviously categorized into a simple good and bad. As a result, the fascists in this film are seen as the unequivocal bad guys, because that's how a child would perceive them. You don't really need to look deeper into the minds of the fascists, because their evil actions are more important to the story. In a similar vein to Sunrise, the heightened exaggeration of the way that something is portrayed is a means to reinforce the underlying message in a stronger and more universal way, and I find that to be something quite interesting about this film, and is one major reason for why this works as an anti-fascist story. In fact, the links between the fantasy stuff and the fascist stuff continue to be an interesting part of this movie, and they really help it to stand out from any other similar story because of the unique interpretations that you can take away from it. It's clear whilst watching this film that the main fairy tale story is more likely than not to be imaginary. It's essentially Ophelia's safe space that she can go to whilst dealing with her real world issues, such as her sick mother and fascist stepfather who she hates. Now, you would think that a child's fantasy world would be light-hearted and wholesome, but instead, it's dark and scary and mysterious here, because fascism is starting to creep into the stories that Ophelia tells to herself, which thus reflects her loss of childhood innocence. No child should imagine a situation as horrific as the Pale Man scene, but Ophelia does because she sees the fascist Captain Vidal as this monster, with the parallels being shown through the fact that they both sit at the end of a table. Oh, and there's also a pile of shoes. This is a film about fascism set in 1944. I'll give you 3 guesses what this represents. So yeah, it's clear that the fantasy sequences such as the Pale Man scene directly tie into fascism. Not only is this a unique way to reflect the main theme of the film, but it does add a lot to Ophelia's character as it shows her imagination and loss of innocence over time, which thus makes her a bit more than your stock child protagonist. But the main thing I like about the fantasy scenes are its ambiguous moments, particularly at the end with the simple question of, was it actually real or not? Now, I know I said earlier that it's implied to be imaginary, and this is supported by the fact that Vidal can't see the fawn at the end, but there's equally enough evidence to argue that the fantasy stuff was actually real, as Ophelia did use the chalk to escape, and Vidal was drugged by Ophelia, so it's likely that we can't trust his perception of reality. The film never gives a clear answer for either argument, and that's honestly really great, as it makes the film more interesting to talk about as a result. Plus, it reflects Del Toro's belief that absolute certainty equals authoritarianism, which means that it's better for us to create our own interpretations that we personally believe in. Speaking of ambiguity, I also like some of the unsolved mysteries in the film, such as, why did Ophelia eat the food? I like it because we can create our own theories out of it. I personally subscribe to the theory that the fawn secretly made her eat it as part of the test, with the evidence being that the sound in the scene is kinda hypnotic in a way. It's kinda hard to explain, but listen out next time you watch this scene. Anyway, all of those points are related to the fantasy sequences, but that's not the main part of the film. Most of the film actually takes place in reality in the aftermath of the Spanish Civil War, with Captain Vidal hunting down the rebel groups, and these scenes are brutal in their depictions of the evils of fascism. They just do not let up, and they get so violent and gory at points that I'm convinced that Tarantino took over for a second. It's very effective. However, this kinda leads me on to a point which I've been feeling more and more in recent times. I think that Vidal was a little bit too brutal of a villain. Now yes, we're not meant to sympathise with Vidal at all. He is an irredeemable monster who murders people left, right and centre. But that's all he really is, to be honest, and I honestly think that makes him less compelling and effective. For me, the most terrifying villains are the ones who feel the most human, but Vidal is so evil and angry all the time that he feels less human and more like one of the fairy tale monsters. Now, this was probably an intentional decision on Del Toro's part, but I personally think that a more compelling Vidal would have been that bit better. Just have him smile once. Have a scene where he does something kinda normal. Use the dinner scene as a way to have him sort of fake an affection for his wife in order to trick everyone else at the dinner into thinking that he's a normal person. I would have much rather seen the film kind of manipulate the audience into seeing him in a slightly different way, even if it's just for one scene, as that will make him feel more human, which thus makes his evil actions more shocking. I mentioned this in my Letterboxd review for Django Unchained, but I think villains are scarier when they smile more than they frown, because you don't know when the aggression is going to strike. Now, obviously I was talking about Candy in that context, but instead I'm going to use a different Tarantino villain as a point of comparison to Vidal. I'm specifically going to use Hans Landa from Inglourious Basterds, because, you know, fascism and everything. Honestly, to me at least, Landa is just the better version of Vidal, because he's got this weird charm to him. He tricks you into thinking you're safe with him until that moment where his more quiet aggression comes out. But this wider range of emotion is what makes him more compelling and more terrifying for me. Vidal, meanwhile, is just angry and violent all the time, even when he's just shaving. This means that anything horrific that he does just finds itself blending together for me instead of sticking out. I essentially become numb to his evil because it's all I see from him. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that I found some of the real world scenes a bit repetitive in their violence, and that could have been resolved if we just saw more emotions to Vidal. Keep him evil, absolutely, but also make him a bit more interesting at the same time. But that's really the only major thing I'd change about this film, and it's not really a big deal to be fair. It's clear what this film wanted to go for, and this change is definitely more of a personal thing I feel. Anyway, in spite of a slightly bland Vidal, there's still plenty of great characters to balance him out. I especially loved the kind, caring Mercedes and the epic as shit Doctor. I don't know why everyone in my class thought that he was so epic, other than the fact that he's a nice guy, but we all loved every scene he was in and was devastated when he died. Also, his name's Dr. Ferrero. I've never been able to take his name seriously because my teacher nicknamed him Dr. Ferrero Rocher. That's now his new permanent name, and you can't tell me otherwise. Now that I've covered the themes and characters of this film, I think that now is the perfect time to talk about the visuals, which is especially important to do in this context because the questions on global cinema in the exam were all about aesthetics and film form, so I can't not bring up the visuals in relation to this film. But yeah, this is a very technically impressive and gorgeous looking movie, and I think that this is primarily thanks to Guillermo del Toro, who is, in my opinion, one of the most talented contemporary directors we have. My goodness, this man has such a keen eye for filmmaking, and he makes every shot look like a beautiful work of art. He's able to create so many fantastical worlds and scenarios with so much unique whimsy to them, in spite of their darker undertones. He's an absolute master of his craft, and Pan's Labyrinth is his most famous film for a reason. Although I still prefer The Shape of Water personally. Still, Del Toro directs the hell out of this movie. It is just such a visual treat which successfully captures the horrors of fascism alongside childlike wonder. I just love the colours, the framing of the shots, and the scene transitions. Oh my god, those scene transitions between the fantasy world and real world are so good! Oh man, those moments gave me way too much pleasure to be honest. Oh, and all this praise of the visuals is without mentioning all of the phenomenal practical effects used for the creature designs, such as with the Fawn and the Pale Man. These creatures still look incredible, even today, with the Pale Man especially being absolutely fucking terrifying. Side note, but seeing everyone's blind reaction to this scene in class was hysterical. None of them were prepared for this scene, let me tell ya. However, yeah, I hate to be a negative Nancy, but not all of the effects look good. The practical stuff is amazing, no doubt, but the 2006 CGI is definitely showing its age. I mean, it's not awful and doesn't take me out of the film too much, but it is a bit jarring to go from the phenomenal looking Fawn to the CG Toad, which looks kinda rough, not gonna lie. Still, Del Toro's such a good director that he's able to show these things off in such a way that only the most observant people will notice the issues with it. On the whole though, this film is absolutely beautiful, and I don't just mean that in terms of its visual qualities, as the music is also incredible, and everything put together helps to bring some light to the horror shown. This film doesn't sugarcoat anything, and it even ends with Ophelia dying, but it's got this strange beauty to it which makes the film stick out more in your mind as we truly get to see this childhood innocence destroyed. Because of the way that this film was presented, I damn nearly cried at the ending on my latest rewatch. I'm not even joking, it's just such a tragic scene, but it's also so well done. Overall, I absolutely loved Pan's Labyrinth. Whilst I personally would have liked to have seen a more interesting Vidal to make some of the real world scenes more varied, the rest of the film is firing on all cylinders, so I can't get too mad. Its themes are really strong, its violence is brutal but warranted, the beauty of the film helps with the emotion, and the story is just so unique. Considering the fact that my favourite film of all time is a fairy tale, it's not much of a surprise that I also loved this fairy tale as well.
Let's put a smile on that face.